Welcome to the Virtual Cell Conference. Thank you so much for coming to our session on project-based learning as the vehicle for school transformation. We've got an awesome episode here for you. And what we've done is we've taken our larger presentations and we have filtered them down into 10 minutes or less and popped them all together. So who is we? My name is Ryan Steuer. I'm the Executive Director of Magnify Learning. We're a national nonprofit organization that does PBL professional development across the country. You're also going to hear from Dr. Jean Lee from the University of Indianapolis and how she's using PBL in higher ed to transform education. And you'll also get to hear from Jeff Spencer, who's the principal of Southport Elementary on the south side of Indianapolis, how they're using PBL to reach their community and transform education. So in true PBL form, we'll stick to that format and we'll have a driving question. Our driving question, as you can see, is how can high quality PBL be the vehicle for school improvement? We love PBL. So if you want to know about PBL, you need to talk to people that are super geeky about PBL, and you are in luck because there are 3 of us that are. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the theory and the research behind PBL. I'm also going to bookend that with some resources at the end of this presentation. So make sure that you're here for that so you can get a free copy of my book and a bunch of resources from the 3 of us. You're going to love it. Next, after you hear PBL from me, you're going to hear from Jeff Spencer. He's going to talk about how he has used the systemization of PBL and data to turn around several schools that he's been the administrator at. You're also going to hear from Jean Lee and her experience of preparing 100+ STEM teachers through her higher ed program. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. You're going to love it. Let's jump in. So if you look at PBL versus a traditional classroom, you're going to see a couple of different things. So here's one graphic that we use for that. Here is a traditional project, if you will. You're going to see a lecture, you're going to practice some, and then you're going to do some kind of an activity, and then eventually you'll test. And then at the very end is when you do the project, after you've learned everything. In PBL, we're going to flip that. We're going to use an entry event at the very beginning. As you can see on the screen here, we're going to launch the project at the very, very beginning with the driving question. Why would you launch a project if your learners haven't learned anything yet? What are they going to do? What they're going to do is they're going to be immensely curious about the project. So you might say, hey, 8th graders, we're going to launch this project, and there are parents that will find out that their child has a genetic disease. And there's always a first day for that. And as soon as you find that out as a parent, you want to know everything there is to know about that disease. And you 8th graders are going to create PSAs, PowerPoint presentations, pamphlets, all the information that a parent would need to know how to help their child. And we're going to put those in doctors' offices. Do you want to do it? Of course you do, right? Like, you're super excited. So you start that, and then you start to think, right? As the facilitator, the teacher, you might get nervous and say, well, how are they going to do that if they don't know anything about Punnett squares? Or they don't know anything about technical writing? Well, ask them what they need to know. So that's our next section. You get into need to knows. You say, well, what do you need to know to complete this project and help the community in this case? And they'll say all those same things. Like, we don't know Punnett squares. They'll say things like, how do we get points and how do we work in groups? Those kinds of things too. But essentially, you're setting up this pathway for learning that is started with learner interest. So they're excited about this project that you're involved in, and now they're going to ask you to teach them about Punnett squares and technical writing, which is great because now that's how you develop pure inquiry. You're still going to give quizzes to check for understanding. You're still going to have class discussions and practice presentations and problems. And you're going to have a rubric because we're going to be results oriented and we're going to be adhering to the academic standards. So all those things are still in there, but then at the end you're going to have this public display of the work, which elevates the entire process because it's an authentic project that's actually being used in the real world. These are some of the key components of PBL that a traditional project can miss. So what is project-based learning? Project-based learning, here's kind of the definition we have here at Magnify Learning. But it's a way of learning the same content knowledge, the skills, those employability skills that aren't in the standards, but we know are super important for our learners. Those are built into an authentic project. A couple of key pieces. Let's make it graphic. Let's look at this graphic to help explain it. So if you look in your top left, it's the authenticity of a real-world challenge is super important for us. When you look at project-based learning, we want to know how can we get our learners involved in something that's really happening in the real world, and how can they be a part of it, because that builds engagement and it builds inquiry. We want them to have a voice in their learning. We want them to collaborate and work together. We want them to publicly present their work because their work's really important. So you've got to have a community partner to share that work with. And as you start to put these building blocks together, you're moving from a traditional project into PBL, and you see the engagement level go up, and therefore, since the engagement level is up, the rigor can go up, and you can get into deeper learning, and you can get into these topics in a deeper way that you've never been able to do before, which is extremely exciting. Now, as you start to put these things together, you're going to need a framework, and there is a framework to PBL, from that entry event to driving question to the end product that you can find in the resource section. For now, that's kind of my session right there. I'm going to give you the nuts and bolts right there of what PBL and how it differs from a project. We're going to have a lot of inquiry. We're going to launch things up front, and we're going to have community partners that are going to be involved. Now we have Jeff Spencer up. Jeff is an award-winning educator in Perry Township Schools in Indianapolis. He was recently named the 2019-2020 Perry Township Administrator of the Year. Perry Township is the 6th largest district in the state. Jeff serves as a principal of Southport Elementary School. Prior to that, he was a principal of Washington Discovery Academy in Plymouth, Indiana, and the associate principal at Valley Mills in Indianapolis. Jeff also consults with schools and districts to implement student-centered change and develop data-rich cultures. While at Southport Elementary School, SES has been an A-rated school, been named a Magnify Learning demonstration site, and an IDOE STEM certified school. For the 2018-2019 school year, SES was in the top 1% for the state of Indiana in growth during their first year of full PBL implementation. So what you're going to hear from Jeff is that their standardized test scores still go up even when you move to PBL. He's going to push back against the dip by using solid PBL practices and data together to create an awesome experience for kids. Here's Jeff.
Thank you, Ryan, for that introduction. As Ryan said, my name is Jeff Spencer. I am currently serving as the principal of Southport Elementary School in Perry Township. Previous to that, I've been a part of PBL implementations as a lead teacher at Decatur Middle School, as an instructional coach and associate principal at Valley Mills Elementary School, and then I served as principal of Washington Discovery Academy, a school that was already fully implemented within project-based learning. So again, as Ryan said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the strategic implementations of PBL, crafting a vision, an implementation plan, and knowing your impact. And talking about how each of those things are critical aspects of a successful PBL implementation, and some takeaways from doing this at a number of different sites. So when we think about creating a vision, I think at this point, for most people, the Simon Sinek video and the TED Talk that is about kind of finding your why and how motivating that is pretty widespread. But if you've not seen that, check it out. And then I think as you're using that learning, think about how you can create a common why for your staff. So one of the first things we did at a retreat, staff retreat, our first interaction as a staff together, was give the teachers an opportunity to think about their personal why. Why are they educators? Why are they in the field of education? And we documented those things, and then those things stood in our staff room the rest of the year. The other piece of that was going back to the previous slide. The picture on the previous slide was our ideal graduate. And so as a staff, we built, what do we really want from our students? And it typically isn't that we want better test scores. And I would challenge you that that's the result that you do want, but it's not the driving factor. If you do things the right way, then you will get increased academic achievement. But the reason we wanted PBL and the reason that we wanted what we wanted from our ideal graduate was those things that we want for all of our children. We wanted students who were problem solvers, that were able to communicate. We wanted students that were able to be empathetic, students that could make a positive impact on their community. And so by looking at both the teacher's why and then what we want for our students, that was a way to create some teacher buy-in. And so it wasn't a administrative decision of this is what we're going to do. It was a way to craft together, what do we want for our students? What's the best way to do that? And then for us, that answer became student-centered learning. It became project-based learning, implementation of Project Lead the Way. Our next piece that we did was, it's also critically important to see it in action. Our staff, we were fortunate to be able to take a day of our fall break, and we had over 20 staff members that made the trip up to Plymouth, Indiana. And we got a chance to see PBL in action, mainly at Washington Discovery Academy, a K-4 building. But because we wanted to see that holistic view, we also went to Riverside Intermediate, Lincoln Junior High, and Plymouth High School, Widener School of Inquiry, to be able to see what it looked like at different levels. And I think for teachers, it's so important for them to be able to see what that looks like, so they can kind of make some sense of it and understand it, so that they have not just a conceptual understanding, but they can actually see concretely what would this look like in our school. I think the final piece is, like, I call it a decision-making filter, but once you decide that this is what you want for kids, then all the decisions that you make and all the adult learning and resources, everything that you do needs to go through the filters. How does this help us implement PBL with fidelity? And so as we've done that, we've considered new district initiatives or new adoptions or our yearly focus on improvement. How does that fit through the PBL lens? And we've been true to that, and I think that's a critical part of implementing well. Our next step was the creation of an implementation plan. And having done this a number of different times, I think we found something that has really worked well and I think can help others. It was important for us to, as a school that was, again, we're a very diverse school with about 85% free and reduced, about 75% diversity. We've got challenges related to that, but we've also been super successful, typically an A-rated school with high levels of growth. So we didn't want to just throw something out there not knowing if it worked. And so our implementation plan became the idea of a PBL lead team. So we had some leadership people that came up with kind of this strategic plan on what did this look like over 3 years. And as administrators, we drove a lot of the creation of that, but with lots of staff feedback. And we were fortunate that at the end of my first year, we were able to offer some summer training, what we called our PBL lead team. We opened it up to the entire building, so anyone that wanted to opt in could. The criteria was that you were going to do 2 days of training with Magnify Learning, and then you were going to implement PBL the next year, and that we were going to meet on a monthly basis to support each other as a PBL leadership team. And the PBL lead team or PBL learning team, the important aspects for that was it allowed us to figure out what worked for us. We ended up having our entire leadership team, instructional leadership team, be a part of that training. And then it was great because we had at least 2 teachers at each grade level. So they were able to have a collaborator right at their grade level. And the goal, again, was to figure out what worked. What were those critical attributes? Because we know that PBL has core components, but it can look different in different contexts. And so we were able to identify for us at Southport Elementary School with our evaluation system and our students and our specific needs, what works best. And then the following year, when we had our entire staff training, we were able to present some lessons and some formats and some data, all that supported that this works for our school and this works for our students. So as you're thinking about implementation, there's lots of different ways to do that. You can do full staff training and implementation all in year 1. You can train a couple lead teachers and let them be kind of the lone wolves to start. And there's lots of different ways it works, and I've worked with schools and had personal experience with that. I would just advocate for that PBL lead or PBL learning team to identify in a smaller setting what works and then be able to replicate things for others. My last piece, anyone that knows me knows that I love data. I am, I think, super data driven to a probably over the top nerdy perspective, but data is so important. I think it's important to know our impact as educators. We know from the work of Hattie that if you want to know your impact, you've got to have evidence for that. You've got to have student work. You've got to analyze those things on a regular basis. And so we created an intentional plan, both for baseline and ongoing data collection. Our entire staff took a survey before any of this started to assess their knowledge dispositions around PBL, and then we've retaken that survey over time so we could see how our staff has grown during this time. We also were very intentional about collecting data with our formative assessment. We use something called Evaluate in Perry Township that on a monthly basis measures ELA and math growth, we were able to compare, again, students in PBL environments versus those that were still in a great learning environment, but a more traditional approach. And that allowed us to measure that PBL was having a positive impact on our students. We have monthly data meetings anyway, so as we have continued with this, we've looked at within our cluster meetings and data tracking, and then in our data meetings, how is this aligning to our PBL work, and making sure that the critical standards that we're teaching in PBL units, that we're getting high levels of growth. And so I think that as an administrator or in the classroom, think about how are you going to measure your impact with the PBL implementation, and how are you going to not just do that in the short term, but do it at a systemic level. Again, we know that school accountability and the way we measure student performance is not perfect, but at the same time, I would challenge you that our projects should be rigorous. They should be standards-based. We should be able to identify and communicate the growth that we are making because of the instructional model that students are in. So I hope this has helped you kind of push your thinking around what implementation should be, and I hope that you have data at the front of your mindset related to that. So that will conclude my portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Jeff. I told you were going to get PBL and data together. I absolutely love it. And you're going to love hearing from Dr. Jean Lee. Jean is an associate professor of teacher education at the University of Indianapolis. She holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction and mathematics education from Indiana University Bloomington. Dr. Lee teaches mathematics education and curriculum courses and works in urban and rural classrooms to support K-12 STEM teachers. Jean's been involved in leading several professional development projects, working with teachers at the state and international levels. Her research interests include project-based learning and the preparation of teachers for high-need urban school settings. Her recent publication is Rigor, Relevance, and Relationships, Making Mathematics Come Alive with PBL. If anybody ever says that PBL doesn't fit in math class, you come and talk to Jean. At least that's what I do. You're absolutely going to love her as a speaker. Here she is.
Hello, thanks for being with us today. I'm Jean Lee, and I'm an associate professor at University of Indianapolis and the chair of Department of Teaching and Learning. Today, I share with you our story about how PBL has impacted our School of Education teacher preparation programs. I want to start us off with the Indiana Department of Education STEM Playbook. It is a 6-year implementation roadmap on how we have to have our schools be STEM ready. And the first strategic objective listed is to improve STEM instruction. 100% of Indiana K-12 teachers will be trained in problem-based, project-based, inquiry-based approaches to learning by 2025. In order for our university to be proactive and our candidates to be marketable, we decided we needed to train our pre-service teachers in these types of instruction, and specifically in project-based learning. One of the programs that I would like to highlight is our Teach STEM Cube program, and it's going into its 4th year to produce high-quality STEM teachers knowledgeable specifically in project-based learning. It's funded by NOIS, and it's an NSF project. It's a 1-year clinical residency MAT program and prepares candidates with an undergraduate STEM degree for a career in teaching middle school or high school mathematics or science. Candidates are immersed in partner schools from the first day of school year to the 2nd week of May, and the curriculum includes education and math and science content courses with an emphasis on project-based learning. And there's a $30,000 full tuition stipend, which is a bonus, a benefit. Aside from the IDOE 6-year STEM strategic initiative, UIndy has been preparing their pre-service teachers in project-based learning since 2010. We believe PBL helps students develop executive functioning skills needed to live in a knowledge-based, highly technological society, and it lends itself to accommodating students with varying learning styles and differences, which aligns with universal design for learning principles and promotes a growth mindset and being a lifelong learner. We incorporate technology so it brings relevance to the learning at hand, and it lends itself to authentic assessment. And lastly, it's supported by research on its efficacy. In the Teach STEM Cube program, we integrate and scaffold project-based learning intentionally with our candidates. Students learn about PBL in semester 1 by designing a PBL unit with the help of their content instructor and someone that's knowledgeable in PBL pedagogy. In semester 2, the candidates implement their PBL units in a clinical residency setting. And then in the summer, the candidates revise their classroom tested PBL units and make them available for classroom teachers online. In the next slides, I share with you the impact of having PBL threaded in our Teach STEM Cube program. We found that cooperating mentor teachers adopt the PBL units and technology that our candidates have designed and implemented to use in their own classrooms. Our cooperating mentor teachers and clinical faculty view this experience as a professional development for themselves as they learn about PBL. Our school partnerships have also been strengthened. We share the various technology we are using and the most up-to-date research-based practices. In fact, many candidates are hired as teachers in the schools where they did their clinical residency. Supervisors are able to see how candidates implement the units, and they bring in community partners and various stakeholders to provide feedback on school children's projects and engage them in the real world hands-on learning. And lastly, we've been told by administrators who hire candidates that our candidates are not typical first-year teachers, and they take on leadership roles within their building. We've also been told that our candidates are comfortable presenting, interacting, and or teaching in front of administration, community, and other stakeholders and exhibit flexible thinking. We believe our candidates possess their attributes because of our PBL curriculum and the practices that we have engaged in them consistently throughout their clinical residency. Because we found our candidates to be highly effective STEM teachers, we've also used several components of the Teach STEM Cube program and embedded these changes into our other teacher preparation programs. We have gutted both the old undergraduate, elementary, and secondary programs and recreated these programs so that students' experiences would be truly reflective of the just-in-time relevant learning and scaffolded these experiences meaningfully. For example, the seniors in the elementary education program, they design and implement service learning, inquiry-based passion projects that function as PBL units. They start conceptualizing them in the junior year or earlier, and there's built-in scaffolds that allow them to be exposed to PBL practices starting from the freshman year. And in our new secondary education program, students are immersed in a clinical experience from day one with need to knows, and they go in the program in a cohort model. In our old secondary program, students did not have clinical experience until their junior year, so there was a disconnect between what they were learning and what they were practicing. We hope this new integrated model allows them to transfer what they're learning in coursework into their classroom. Thank you.
Isn't Dr. Lee's program awesome? I have been in there to hear her fellows' projects, and it's absolutely phenomenal work. So I love the work that she's doing. I love the work that Jeff's doing. There's some phenomenal things happening in the project-based learning world, and you should jump in. But you probably have some questions or some need to know, so go ahead. I'm just kidding. I can't actually answer them right now because I think this is asynchronous. But what we have done is we've created this QR code right here, and if you get your phone and you zap that QR code, it will take you to a Google Drive folder. And when you get to that Google Drive folder, there's a free copy of my book, Project-Based Learning, Stories and Structures, Wins, Fails, and Where to Start. So basically what my book has is the structure of PBL, and then there's a student story after every one of those chapters. Then I share a win story, a fail story, because it's not perfect, and then a place for you to start wherever you're at in your journey. We also have a ton of resources from Dr. Lee and from Mr. Spencer that you'll absolutely love. We've got some basic PBL resources as far as group contracts that we connect to. So there's a bunch of stuff in there. Whatever you need, it's in there somewhere. Our contact information's in there. If you don't find it, please reach out because we'd love to help you. Here at Magnify Learning, we like to think that PBL will help you engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classroom.